Hi everybody, this is Crypto Rich, working with you to get rich with crypto, filling our pockets with crypto profits. I am once again very, very excited to have with me Tom Luongo from tomluongo.com and also Alexander Mercouris from the Duran. And we're going to be talking about lots and lots and lots of stuff because there's so much going on in the world right now.
Bitcoin, the best money we've ever had. With a different kind of money comes a different kind of card. A metal card, powered by crypto. Every time you spend, you get 3% back instantly. Want more? We've got that too. Don't like fees? Neither do we. How about these perks? The future is here. Reserve yours now.
Tom, Alexander, thank you so much for making yourself available. Anything you guys want to say, just to introduce yourselves, and then we'll get right into it.
Alex, you go ahead.
Well, we've done several of these programs before. It's always a huge pleasure because we have such interesting discussions. I'm going to make one observation. You said lots going on, lots is going on, but in my opinion, there is one single overarching story, and the center and focus of it is in the United States. And it is there at the moment where the world is being shaped, because we're seeing a titanic political conflict going on. It's perhaps greater than the individuals who are participating in it, because it's not even a battle of ideologies. Though I know there is ideology involved, no question about that, but it's also a fundamental battle of values, philosophies, lifestyles, every conceivable kind of thing. So it is a huge battle, and it is shaping everything else. So when you look at events in countries like, say, Hong Kong, in Russia, which we're going to talk about, in the European Union, which we're also going to talk about, in the oil markets and things like that, we have to understand that there is this big central event that is going on in the United States, and that is what is shaping everything else. This may be the last time, by the way, that the United States has this pivotal importance in the world, but it is pivotal nonetheless. And Tom, you are in the United States. You have your finger on the pulse of events there.
Nice.
One of my great problems, as I've said many times, is that I can look at these things from a distance, and distance does sometimes give you perspective. That is also true. But I don't have that finger on the pulse, because the only American city I know well is New York, which so many people in America tell me isn't America at all. So there we go. But we're going to have a stimulating discussion on these great issues. And Tom, you're absolutely the right person to talk about with these sorts of subjects.
I appreciate that, Alex. Thank you very much. And being a self-imposed exile from New York, I can tell you that, New York is just not the rest of the world. Because in the other side of the world, where I am in rural North Florida, we were talking about this before we started recording this morning, that you can see the seeds of what is going to come over the course of this next decade in the United States, because you're absolutely right, Alex. This is all aspects of one big story. So all the things we talk about today, just keep it in context of, this is a culture war that's morphing into a civil war that is becoming something very dangerous. And I think even you touched on it, something that can get out of control of the people who think they're controlling it for their own benefit. Remember that I watch all of this stuff, not just here in the United States, but around the world. And these international actors, I call them the Davos crowd. I don't have a better term for them than that. That they think they run the world, right? I won't tell you that they do run the world, but I think they run the world. There are factions within them. They fight amongst themselves for dominance and power and all the rest of it. But at the end of the day, that's what's happening here. And they set things in motion, and they have plans. And you can go read their plans on places like the World Economic Forum and the IMF and various documents published by the United States and the European Union and all the rest of it. And you can see these things. You can see that superstructure that they're trying to build. And then when you understand that, then you can start plugging all the events that occur and the order in which they occur. You can see how they're attempting to make those things happen. And even when things don't go their way, and things happen out of the blue, like the election of Donald Trump or Brexit or anything along those lines, when those discontinuous or anomalous events occur, it doesn't dissuade them. They just double down.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's the important part. And they just move their timetables forward or backward or whatever they have to do. And that's so in the context of most of what Alex and I talk about on our day-to-day commentary about what's happening in world events, I know we both think the same kind of thing, and it's just something I never make time to remind everybody about. So at the beginning of this, it's really important to keep that in mind while we discuss all these nitty-gritty bits and pieces and components, because once you accept that, then all of this makes so much more sense than just like random chaos,
Yes.
which it looks like on the surface.
And the one overriding issue that everything is contained in, and we spoke before we started recording, what we're going to try and do is start in the West and move eastwards from the US across to the UK, Europe, Russia, Israel. We may get as far as Hong Kong, time allows, right? But everything what Alex and Tom were saying is all to do with what's happening in the US. And as I understand it, it is about deposing Trump and what he represents.
Yes.
Yes.
And then I know that there was the Russia collusion that fell apart, the Ukraine impeachment that fell apart, and lately we've had the Russian bounty. Like the Taliban really need money to kill Americans.
And that money wasn't supplied by the CIA. Like, come on.
Russia's really going to waste its rubles, right? Like you might well, like, Tom, I'm going to pay you to eat meat. I'm going to waste my money.
And buy guns. And, that's what I'm going to do. Right? Yeah.
That's right. I'm going to waste my money on that.
Great. I mean, you want to pay me to eat meat? Okay. Pay me to breathe too while you're at it. Like, okay, just don't make me wear a mask while I'm doing it.
Something happened. Neither of us, I don't think any of us have read the report. It came out in Zero Hedge. It's on the Duran's website that Ghislaine Maxwell has been arrested in New Hampshire. Shall we start with that? Anything?
Sure. And Alex, why don't you take this, because I'm going to sit and while you do that,
I'm going to read the article.
I'm going to read a little bit.
You haven't read it.
Trying to get up to speed.
It's a very interesting story, because the last we heard about her was that she was in Paris, and now she's apparently been arrested in the United States, in New Hampshire, I believe. Now, who is she? She's, by the way, correct pronunciation, I believe, is Ghislaine Maxwell. Somebody who knows her or knew her told me this. So just saying. So she is supposed to be, and in fact, I'm sure is, the principal accessory and sidekick of this very strange man, Jeffrey Epstein, who was involved in this extremely elaborate ring, this child prostitution ring, of which Maxwell himself was Maxwell and Epstein were at the center of. Now, the question is, this isn't just a simple prostitution ring. It ties in exactly to the points we were making, because so far as we can tell, Epstein seems to have been involved in drawing funds primarily from Eastern Europe, investing them in the New York property markets, becoming involved in all sorts of important intelligence activities. We don't really have a great deal of information about this, and certainly involving himself to an extraordinary degree in the US elite. And Ghislaine Maxwell is British. She has connections to Israel. There are constant stories that she's involved in intelligence activities. She's absolutely part of the British establishment, the establishment in France, the establishment of the United States. She is an absolutely pivotal figure. Her father is Robert Maxwell, who was, of course, one of the big, newspaper tycoons in Britain, and he was also involved in publishing. But he was also a man who was heavily involved in intelligence and secret activities, in all sorts of things. The assumption many people are making, which I, by the way, am making, is that Ghislaine inherited some of this role. And if you look at the kind of people that Epstein seems to be close to, we see so many of the names that are turning up, which are people involved primarily, I'd say, on the Democratic Party. That is my impression, the sort of neo-globalist Davos crowd elite. And here we are, and this is a huge scandal involving them. It seemed for months that this scandal had gone to sleep, and then a few weeks ago, we heard that the federal attorney, the federal prosecutor, the US attorney for the Southern District of New York, Jeffrey Berman, who was the man who was in overall charge of that investigation, he was suddenly dismissed. very mysteriously, new people, well, we don't yet know who's going to take over, but suddenly a flurry of activity. And we see now Ghislaine Maxwell suddenly being arrested, attempts to interview Prince Andrew, who is another part of this ring, and all sorts of things going on. So I am sure that there is a political aspect to this battle. I am sure that there are all kinds of people who are concerned about it. We have Alan Dershowitz leaking he's one of the people who appears to have been involved, but he's now leaking the fact that Ehud Barak has been connected to it, former Prime Minister of Israel. So it's an extraordinarily gripping story, and it seems that someone at some level in the US government is finally taking steps to bring this case to its conclusion. And given whom Epstein was involved in, one has to wonder, because as I said, we've been talking about this overarching titanic struggle in the United States, who that person is, which side that person is on. I think it is clear that it is on the anti-Davos side. But this is something that Tom and I and Crypto will all be talking about, no doubt, in a bit more detail.
Yes.
Yeah, so my interpretation of this, the first thing that popped into my head was like, when I saw Trump go after Jeffrey Berman at the Southern District of New York, that to me was a huge light bulb went off. As a matter of fact, I wrote an article about it. It got retweeted by Sidney Powell, of all people, Michael Flynn's lawyer. All right, so she read it and went, this is interesting, you should consider this. And when Sidney Powell says you should consider this, you should consider it, which is that Berman was the guy who led the raid on Jeffrey Epstein's compound. And from what we understand, nothing has happened with that investigation since then, just like Anthony Weiner's laptop has gone nowhere, because the Southern District of New York is the most corrupt political institution, judicial district in the world, relative to the size of the crimes that are committed there, which are trillions of dollars and millions of people's lives destroyed. I mean, Somalia may be more like overtly corrupt, but the Southern District of New York is more practically corrupt, right? So knowing that, and knowing that that's where important investigations into important people go to die, that includes the banks, which spawned Occupy Wall Street and all of that stuff, that all gets processed through the Southern District of New York. Knowing that, and knowing that Trump has twice now tried to get his guy in charge of that district by appointing a new U.S. attorney. First, he fired Preet Bharara, who was an Obama guy and a Wall Street guy, and they played games to then get Berman appointed because the Senate wouldn't confirm Trump's pick. Okay, and then Berman was asked to resign by Bill Barr, so that William Barr, the Attorney General, could then appoint who he wanted to, which in this case was going to be the head of the SEC, Jay Clayton, apparently a guy that they trust. And Berman said no. Why? Why would he say no? Why? Because he's sitting on all of this information, and it's his job. He says no and forces them to fire him. When that happens, that makes it impossible for Trump to do a recess appointment outside of the senatorial confirmation process. So now they can play the same game they played before. They can promote from within the judicial board. They'll act extrajudiciously like they did the last time, and they'll keep playing this out. And they're hoping to probably draw this out past the election, and then they can put their guy back in place, and nothing changes. This is classic delaying tactics like we've seen for 4 years with the EU and Brexit, right? Same kind of thing. So that's what's happening there. So when I saw that, I'm like, oh, Trump's not going down without a fight, because he's going after the Southern District of New York, which I said the day 6 months before he was even elected. I said, if that guy goes after the Southern District of New York, he's for real. And the question will be whether he's going to be allowed to go after the Southern District of New York or not. So, if you, Alex, if you want to,
there's just a few questions, because of course this is exactly where I'm outside as an outsider.
Right.
I mean, as I understand it, the United States is divided up into federal. The Justice Department system is divided into federal districts.
Right.
And as I also understand it, the Southern District of New York covers Manhattan.
Yes.
And Wall Street and the financial community. And I read somewhere that it is in fact the most prestigious of all the federal districts.
Of course it is.
It's the pivotal one. And I've also read, and this is something that seems very remarkable, but it seems that in picking the US attorney for a federal district, you normally consult and get the agreement of the two senators who represent that, whose state covers that particular federal district. And the point to understand is that in New York, they're both Democrats. And they're both very connected to the Wall Street system. And they have been one of the fundamental reasons why it's been very difficult for Trump to put his own person in control of the Southern District of New York. So it's a frontal attack on the most powerful bureaucracy within the Justice Department system, outside the Justice Department itself in Washington, D.C. And of course, it's not just Epstein, who's clearly an important investigation there, but it also looks at lots of other things too. And I mean, again, Tom, this is much more your world than mine, but as I understand it, and this is, I have been, told about these things by people who know, but you probably know, will know much more about this. There is, of course, a connection between Wall Street money, high tech, the tech companies, the money revolves around, and it's, in other words, it's a pivotal place if you're going to control the way in which politics shapes in the United States.
Understand that the big story here is that this goes all the way back to the rape of Russia in the 90s. This goes back to Bill Browder. All of these people all of this stuff goes through the Southern District of New York. The persecution of Martin Armstrong, all of this stuff is all there. And you got to understand that the minute you go after the SDNY, you start uncovering all of the stuff that's been buried. And now everybody, Burisma, all of it goes through there. And every bit of like HSBC money laundering cases, all those things, they were all settled in the Southern District of New York. All those things were settled out of court. Generally, they pay fines of billions on stealing trillions, that kind of thing. And at the end of the day, it's not even a good tax rate, is the way I like to put it. Goldman gets away with stealing $500 billion, and then they pay a $1 billion fine, and that makes the headline of the Wall Street Journal. And I'm like, well, that's still only a 0.2% tax rate. My tax rate's 28% as a self-employed guy. Like, really? Like, I'm sorry, like, at least, pay long-term capital gains on this, guys. I mean, at the very least, could you please at least pay 10%? No, of course not. So, and there's a revolving door between the SEC.
Tom, stop for a second.
Yeah.
Can you check your signal? Because you're...
Am I fading in and out? I'm going to be honest. It is as good as it will be. So okay. I will have. No one else is. Everybody else has been told, don't use anything. No, but if my it might be the so I just get dropouts here and there. So to go back, know that there's a big regulatory. The whole thing is regulatory. It's like the classic case of regulatory capture. There's a big revolving door between Wall Street, the SEC, the Justice Department, the Attorney General's office, and the Southern District of New York. And the same people just revolve through all of those doors, right? And people in the SEC and the Commodities Commission don't want to prosecute Wall Street because they're looking for jobs when they leave the government office and all of this stuff. So this is regulatory capture is real. The Southern District of New York is completely corrupt, and Chuck Schumer is there in place to keep it all running smoothly. And so going back to Ghislaine Maxwell, this is another attempt, I think, another frontal assault on these people. They couldn't get Berman out. So now, what a shock. 2 weeks later, all right, let's go grab Maxwell. And I'm thinking, in my mind, a lot of this stuff, timing is everything. In politics, timing is everything in this process. So I wouldn't be shocked if they'd known where she is for weeks.
Right.
Honestly. And so what does that mean? Well, we can go from there. Alex, why don't you take it?
Because it's very interesting, because just a few days ago, not very long ago, about a week ago, the story was that she was in Paris. Mm-hmm. And it now turns out that she was actually in the United States, or at least that she's been arrested in the United States. So how did she come from Paris to the United States? Was she ever in Paris? What has been going on here? Was she being protected somewhere, or kept somewhere, or being parked somewhere? We just don't know. There is so much uncertainty and so much mystery, but somehow they've managed finally to catch up with her. And it's been interesting to see the tempo of this investigation, which, as I said, to all intents and purposes, it seemed to have gone completely to sleep. It's now suddenly and dramatically picking up. And that begs so many questions. And it is not a coincidence, absolutely not a coincidence, that the chief prosecutor, the US attorney for the Southern District of New York, lost his job at the same time. Now, can I just point out about something really remarkable about that? Barr, who was the Attorney General of the United States, his boss, asked him to resign, and he refused. I mean, that was an extraordinary act of insubordination. He wasn't, and then Barr had to go to the president, and the president had to sack him. So there was a clear attempt to keep Berman in place. In other words, there was a tussle between Barr and Berman about Berman's job. Now, that in itself is very unusual. It's almost unprecedented, as I understand it, in this kind of situation.
It is, and it's indicative of just how important the Southern District of New York is.
Yeah.
Okay, so when you hear this kind of stuff, you're like, and the Twitterati here in the United States are worthless. They're just, oh, we should impeach Barr over this. This is clearly unconstitutional. Like, okay, whatever. You guys don't know what you're talking about, but that's fine. That's what they're going to do. But so now you ask the question. So why this? Why now? Well, that happens a week after Barr comes out and says he's declaring Antifa as a terrorist or a domestic terrorist organization, right? All these things have to happen in a particular order. Certain things have to go away before the next thing can happen to be able to unlock. They have to have a reason why they can go after certain things. And Barr's, obviously, if he's looking for the funding trail, which is clear as day, that the same people that we're talking about influencing elections in Ukraine, for example, or Serbia or anywhere else, right? They're the same people trying to overthrow the United States here. It's the same people. But from a plumbing standpoint, from a procedural standpoint, Alex, you're a lawyer, know this stuff far better than I do. You just know that in order for these things to occur, they have to occur. In order to get to point D, you have to go through A, B, and C first. And so if Barr has to have proximate cause to fire Berman, and that proximate cause could be he refused to investigate Antifa, or right. And then once that starts, now we can get rid of him now, because why would he want to not investigate Antifa while they're burning down freaking Minneapolis? Because he's trying to protect all these other people. So, and then there's the Israeli angle on this, and I look at this and I'm thinking, this is definitely Trump and Barr continuing their pressure campaign against the people who are attempting to overthrow them, and this is their way of reminding everybody, oh, by the way, we still have tools. And not only that, but we have powerful tools, and these are the powerful tools that are at our disposal. Because once we have this information, we're going to start indicting people.
Now, hold on. Before we go into how this is Trump's counterplay, I want to ask, because I've come across reports, and by the way, I've said this to Tom and Alex, that I listen to every single one of their shows. There's little that I know that I haven't heard from them, right? But I have come across reports of Barr being involved with Epstein, like his father was involved with Epstein in some way, and that also Trump was friends with Epstein at some point. So, my Democratic supporting friends are saying, well, look, Barr and Trump are as complicit as anybody else in all this.
Yeah.
So can you say something about that? And then we'll go into Trump's play.
I mean, Barr's background, he has been heavily involved as a lawyer working for the CIA. And Trump certainly did know Epstein. But so far as one can judge, Trump's connections with Epstein are not particularly close, and it seems that Trump threw Epstein out of his club. That's this club that Trump has in Mar-a-Lago, of which Epstein was a member, when Trump got wind of the fact that Epstein was trying to recruit young women there. So, so far as one can tell, Trump is not personally implicated in Epstein's crimes, unlike some other people. Now, as for Barr himself, what I'm going to say about Barr is this: it's a very difficult thing for people to always understand about lawyers, but you do get lots of lawyers, most lawyers who just hacks. You also get a lot of lawyers who are corrupt lawyers, and you also get a small number of lawyers who are extremely committed to the law, and for whom the law is almost a religion, and they're a kind of priesthood that serves it. Barr comes across to me very much as that kind of category of person. He takes the law extremely seriously. So yes, He's had his affiliations with the CIA. He is by no means a revolutionary or a rebel or somebody who wants to, is looking for fights. Perhaps he is a conservative and incremental figure in a situation which doesn't really call for conservative and incremental figures. But I don't think that he is someone who would cover up crimes in order to, protect people if he sees that crimes have occurred. I'm going to give you an example, a very famous case, famous to lots of lawyers, which is something that happened in France in the 1890s. A lot of people compare the situation in the United States now with the situation in France in the 1890s during the time of the Dreyfus affair. And Dreyfus was a French officer who was framed. He was sent to Devil's Island on an allegation that he was a German agent. And of course, it wasn't true, and the evidence against him was faked. And the defense minister of France at the time was a man called Cavaignac, who was extremely hostile to Dreyfus, completely believed in his guilt. But he discovered, going through all the papers, that the evidence against Dreyfus was faked. And even though this went completely against his beliefs, completely against his ideological positions, and entirely against his own political interests, because he was someone who believed in law, he exposed the fact that the evidence against Dreyfus was fake. Now, you get unusual people to do this. I'm not saying that Barr is at that level of commitment to the law, but if you read his legal texts, and you read the kind of way he writes, he is someone who does generally believe in the law of the United States. He is very much imbued in juristic thinking, and I think he would find it very difficult to cover up something of this nature. So that's where I place him, and that's why, by the way, he was the person who, in the end, brought the whole Russiagate thing to a stop. So that's where I think Barr comes from. I mean, he's politically conservative, politically an establishment figure. He's a friend of the intelligence services, but his loyalty is to his own understanding of the law. Now, I hope I've explained.
It comes across in the interviews. When I've listened to his interviews, he won't get pushed or anything. He won't say anything. No, we've got to let the legal process play out. Very professional.
Yes.
Tom, you want to say something?
And all I'm going to say is I don't disagree with that assessment of Barr. I'm just going to, as playing devil's advocate, take the more cynical view, and just say let's just play out Bill Barr as this a more cynical version of Bill Barr. I think we wind up in the same conclusion, the same space about how we can get to where we are, which is that there's a lot of people in the U.S. who, and certainly in my corner of crank space, believe that Barr was the Bush family's consigliere, and that he was there to protect the crimes of the Bush family at a certain level, or at the very least to make sure that they didn't come to light until after Papa Bush was dead, and that's when he's willing to officially enter into Trump's service as Attorney General. Remember, that doesn't happen until after Bush's funeral. Some stuff happens at Bush's funeral which turned Jeb Bush white. There was a very famous manila folder handed to Jeb Bush, and he lost him. Okay, so there's some of that going on, and that Barr's, I'm sure, you don't rise to that level in the United States government as an attorney, and not have skeletons in your closet.
Of course.
But anybody arguing, but when everybody is as angry as they are in the United States about the corruption and everything else, it's just easy I want to pick out that data point and use that to make my case as to why this, and this. That's fine. That's not good analysis, but you're more than welcome to that opinion because, it's a free country, supposedly. But so I look at Barr and I share a lot of Alex's opinions in that respect, but I also know that the game is probably more complicated than that, and that there's a truce between the Trump clan, because Trump is just as much a gangster as the rest of these people, and the Bush clan. The Bush clan is a clan in decline. They are not an empire. Jeb and the boys were not good enough to build a Bush multi-generation empire. And so now that I think they've come to terms with that, and now that the father is dead and he's been protected and his memory's been protected, now a lot of the things that happened on his watch we can start to see some movement on that. And this is where we get back into Epstein and all this other stuff and some of the things that happened during the 90s let's note how much farther out are the JFK files going to be pushed in time? right? They're not going to be released now until 2021 or 2022, hopefully until after, right? There are reasons why these things happen,
Yes.
right? And so that interpretation of Barr is fine. Like, I agree that let me put it this way. I don't have any reason to discount Alex's interpretation of him as a man who loves the law. I don't have any reason to believe otherwise. But I do also think that, given the complex political realities of the United States, that, he's got his hands and fingers and pies, and he's not, and he knows things he's not supposed to know, or that, and that's fine. At the end of the day, look, everybody's guilty at a certain level. These people don't have to be white knights and pure to do good things. This is one of the fundamental ideological problems with what's happening in the United States politically, is that the BLM Antifa mob have gone completely down the path of, we are the righteous. This is a cultural revolution. We are the righteous ones. We're right. You're wrong. And our righteousness justifies all of our terrible behavior.
Yeah.
And
now we'll come to the BLM, right?
Right. And so
this is about how this is Trump's counterattack.
What's happening now.
Tell us how this is Trump's counterattack against.
So,
Deep State.
getting a hold of Ghislaine Maxwell. Look, the fight here is for Epstein's black book, guys. Because whoever controls Epstein's black book controls Chuck Schumer and Ted Cruz and this one and John Roberts and all these people who act the way they do. And I think, and I'll tell you exactly what I think is coming, which is that Trump has two paths to the presidency as of right now. One, a massive stimulus package to bail out the middle class. Because if the middle class is productive come November, and the GOP is fighting him on this, and this is where I'm like, yep, here's Mitch McConnell. He's going to be on Trump's side until re-election. But the GOP wants him out. The GOP would rather lose with Trump, just like the DNC would rather lose with Biden. I'm not even sure, actually, who they want to be president at this point. But this is what I think is happening. They just want order restored. They want their control restored. What I think this Ghislaine Maxwell thing is all about is, I think this is to spook Hillary Clinton. Here's the gig. I still feel Hillary Clinton is angling to become Biden's VP candidate. I think the virtual convention is a clear sign that there's going to be shenanigans behind the scene. I don't think the fight between her and Obama is over by any stretch of the imagination. Who do you think is leaking all this stuff about Biden? Really? We can't see this? Okay. You think Hillary Clinton is going to stand for Susan Rice to become the first woman president if Biden wins? Are you kidding? Seriously? No. And knowing what we know, Obama will throw Hillary to the wolves because he hates her. Okay. If that will restore order at the top of the power structure, you throw them Hillary. You throw us plebes that we want Hillary. We want her. We want her. We want her in jail. Right? We won Trump the election because you'd be in jail. Those 5 words won him the election. So now, how does Trump win? Stimulus and putting Hillary on the bottom of the ticket. And how do you put Hillary on the bottom of the ticket? You scare her to death with going to jail. And how do you do that? You arrest Ghislaine Maxwell. You get control of Epstein's black book, because she doesn't have any path of staying out of out of jail in a Trump second term. That I believe completely. That all of what Trump is doing at this point to survive this is, if he's like, look, if you're going to take me out, that's fine, but I'm taking as many of you with me as possible, and I'm absolutely taking out Hillary Clinton, because we cannot have a Clinton dynasty, because those people make the Bushes look like Amishmen. And that, I think, is where we are. And I think Barr's on board with this as well. And so that's what I think is happening here. That was my immediate impression this morning when I was trying to process this. I'm like, oh, yeah, that's what this is probably about. Like, because I was writing about this for Newsmax a couple of weeks ago, and an upcoming issue of the newsletter, and I said, look, what's Biden's path to victory? Because it's not winning. He's got to pick a VP candidate that will be acceptable to most of America, right? And it can't be Kamala Harris. They don't trust Kamala Harris and Elizabeth Warren and the rest of them not to turn the DNC over to the woke mob. Like, those guys, once they get a little bit of power, they'll sell out to AOC, BLM, and Antifa, and they'll oust, and they'll take over the party and oust the Pelosi's and the Schumers and all those guys. They will in a heartbeat. That's what I meant earlier by this thing is growing beyond their control. Like, these people think they run the world, they think they have it all locked out, but they're really incompetent. Okay? While they run around like chickens with their heads cut off, trying to, and like the little Dutch boy, and they've only got 10 fingers and there's 40 holes. And that's what I'm seeing all around the United States right now. Okay.
Yes.
And I think Trump is very, very smart about poking the right hole, the right places at the right moments in time, and accelerating the timetable. From the moment Trump said Obamagate on Twitter, I knew this was on.
Yeah. I mean, we're seeing investigations accelerating at every level. And this is one of the great problems with legal process is, of course, there is legal process, exactly as Tom said, is very incremental. In order to get to one point, you have to go through a whole lot of others. You can't jump them. You can't leapfrog them. It just doesn't work like that.
Alex, can I just say, I do understand it because I was involved in
Yeah.
legal processes as a social worker
Yeah.
with dealing with child abuse. And unless it was like the child was going to get assaulted that night and I could go in with the police and remove them,
Yeah.
it was like, okay, we have to go through all the steps. And we're talking about children's welfare, and it takes time because we're not vigilantes. We're a government agency.
No. There's concepts of due process, there's opportunities for legal challenges, and of course the other side has massive legal resources at its disposal. If we're talking here, I mean, if you're talking about the Clintons, they can throw armies of lawyers at you, and they have large parts of the bureaucracy working on your behalf. But at the same time, we're seeing investigations now intensifying and accelerating at every level. So we see the Durham investigation, which apparently is a real investigation. I think a lot of people had doubts about how real that investigation was, but it seems it is a real investigation. Now the Epstein.
Sorry, excuse me for interrupting you. But he has as far as I can tell, like a very stable or a sterling reputation. I think he's a Democrat, but he's like goes by the law. Like
this is what I was saying. I mean, you do get people. I mean, I've come across people like this actually. I mean, you will find always. This is one reason, by the way, why courts are unpredictable, because you will find worldly, cynical judges, and then every so often, and very unexpectedly, you will come across one who simply refuses to be pressured because, as far as they're concerned, this is what the law says and this is what they will do. And you can never completely predict how it's going to turn out. And, Durham may be that kind of a person. I know nothing about him. I've never heard of him until this investigation began. But it seems that is a real investigation. And now it seems like the Epstein investigation is also becoming a real investigation.